Good morning and welcome to Practical Christian Lessons. I am Joshua Pearsall, and today we're going to be working through Jacob Arminius, the Declaration of Sentiments. I'm actually going to move this bookmark. And I'm super excited to get into this. I'm holding the Stephen Gunter translation, and we will not be reading the translation of this if you have missed our previous video. That's very important for this video. So go watch it. And this is just part of our continued reading through the works of Jacob Arminius. Unlike previous ones, if you've been going through them or if you've not started them, this one is going to be far less scholastic in its vocabulary and its tone and its way of being written. And that's because he's not writing to the same scholastic community. The background for this particular Declaration of Sentiments is he's being put on trial by those who are in opposition to him for basically accusing him of being a heretic. And in the Netherlands at this time, that is a capital crime. It's not. This is, for them, state and religion are one. They are shared there. Have your own opinions on that however you want. But that is the world in which Jacob Arminius was living. So, to be accused of this, which he was repeatedly, and as what he was with the Hague when he went before it, was declared innocent as he was every single time he was put on such kind of trial for good reason. That is the background for this. And it's important to also understand, as Jacob Arminius is going to have some strong rhetoric in this and very polemic tones at times, his main argument throughout this entire process of years of being slandered and falsely accused of various things that he just refutes time and time again and shows, and even says, "You accuse me of this, show me where it is said," or bring forth witnesses to show that I have said it. One person's response was literally, "God told me so." That was their reasoning and their justification for their accusations against him. Didn't stick, rightfully so. His main argument in this, even though he is going to be arguing against what is known as the infra and supralapsarian views that's still known, and those are still around in the Reformed tradition or various Calvinistic groups outside of the Reformed tradition. You can look those up and learn from their own sources. Don't just take my word for that. But his main argument is not to try and remove those from the Reformed tradition. He actually, though he has strong critiques, his main argument and what he's been trying to push for years and years and years is simply allowance of his view. And his argument is that it is allowable within the Reformed position, which pre-Dort, it absolutely is. Post-Dort, it's a very different discussion there, which Jacob Arminius did not live to see the Council of Dort. It was called about 10 years after his death, so, it's a lot happened in those 10 years. And that's important historical background for this, as well as if you get this, which if you're going to go through the Declaration of Sentiments, there's free version online. I'll have a link to the free one I'm reading online. We will not be going through my physical one this time, just because I'm already going to be holding this book, and I don't feel like trying to juggle two books. This is the one we've normally been working through, and as far as I'm aware, it's going to be the same as the online link I'm going to have there. And there's various places unlinked. What makes Gunter's translation special is he translates it from the original Dutch in the manuscript that Jacob Arminius had. Whereas this one I have and the one I'm reading from online, all of them translate not from the Dutch, but from a Latin translation of the Dutch. And there are several differences between Gunter's translation and this one. I have not read through all of Gunter's translation or his commentary, but I have read through a bit, and I've already noticed several differences. Also, like if you get Gunter's book, you have this really cool copy of the cover there. I just thought that was cool. And I will read one little thing from this. For the most part, we will not be reading from Gunter's translation. This is not in the public domain. I do not have access to that. But I do want to add in what he has put here that you will not see on this. And we can go and get right into it. If anyone's new here, watch plenty of our other videos. We'll have much lengthier introductions. Check out our doobly-doo below. You'll find a Discord there, playlist, tons of great resources. Come and interact and talk with us there. But we're going to get into this. A Declaration of the Sentiments of Jacob Arminius, Professor of Theology at the University of Leyden, regarding his sentiments on predestination and other doctrines of the Christian religion, about which his opinions have brought him under suspicion. Initially delivered orally in full assembly of the States of Holland, and West Friesland, on October 30th, 1608. Thereafter in writing to the noble lords of government. Leyden, published by the widow of the deceased, that would be Jacob Arminius, and her brothers, printed by Thomas Basin, bookseller at the Music Book, 1610. And then it gets into the section. Just a quick note, and I will bring up his commentary as we're going through this. Hopefully I'll remember to bring it up. I might wait until the end to bring up his commentary, but this one matters for the reading of it. He notes in his commentary here, and you can see here is the introduction. He's got quite a bit of footnotes and commentary here. Here, Arminius uses the phrase Christian religion. Throughout the rest of this piece, he does not use that same phrase. He will just say religion. It means the same thing. He's talking about the Christian religion, unless there's a clear, obvious exception to that. And he also notes, of course, that this is his translation from the original Dutch. It makes a big difference. But, on to this. To the noble and most potent states of Holland and West Friesland, my supreme governor, my most noble, potent, wise, and prudent lords. After the conference which, by the command of your mightiness, was convened here at the Hague between Gamorius and myself, had been held in the presence of 4 ministers under the superintendence of their lordship, the councillors of the Supreme Court, the result of that meeting was reported to your highness. Some allusions having been made in the report of the nature and importance of the controversy between us, it soon afterwards seemed good to your highness to cite each of us, with those 4 ministers, to appear openly before you in our honorable assembly, and in that public manner to intimate to all of us whatever you then judged to be expedient. After we had appeared before your mightiness, Gamorius affirmed that the controversy between him and me was of such immense importance that, with the opinions which I professed, he durst not appear in the presence of his Maker. He likewise asserted that, unless some mode of prevention was promptly devised, the consequences would be that the various provinces, churches, and cities of our native land, and even the citizens themselves, would be placed in a state of mutual enmity and variance, and would rise up in arms against each other. To all those allegations I then made no reply, except that I certainly was not conscious of entertaining any such atrocious sentiments in religion as those of which he had spoken, and I confidently expressed a hope that I should never afford either cause or occasion for schism and separation in the Church of God or in our common country. In confirmation of which I added that I was prepared to make an open and bona fide declaration of all my sentiments, views, and designs on every subject connected with religion, whenever I might receive a summons to appear before his august assembly, and even prior to my retiring at the time from your presence. Your highness having since deliberated upon the proposal and offer which I then made, deem it proper now to summon me before you, for the purpose of redeeming, in this hall, the pledge which I had previously given, to fulfill that promise. I now appear in this place, and will with all due fidelity discharge my duty, whatever it be that is demanded of me in relation to this affair. Yet, since a sinister report has for a long time been industriously and extensively circulated about me, not only among my own countrymen, but also among foreigners, in which I report, I am represented to have hitherto refused, after frequent solicitations, to make an open profession of my sentiments on the matter of religion and my designs concerning it. And since this unfounded rumor has already operated most injuriously against me, I importunately entreat to be favored with your gracious permission to make an ingenious and open declaration of all the circumstances which relate to this business before I proceed to the discussion of other topics. Give me 1 second to put my glasses on. I can read on my computer no problem without them, but for this it's going to be a little smaller. Before we move to the next section, just some quick, interesting historical notes. The very things Jacob Arminius is accused of here by Gamorius falsely. Gamorius is another important figure. Him and Arminius both ended up ruling the Leyden University for a bit. That is correct. I said it correctly. Arminius was in charge of the school for a short time. After the death of the one who was the head of the school, him and Gamorius were sort of running it together. Not well, considering how much Gamorius was set on having antagonism between the two of them. But it is interesting that later the Remonstrants, the movement that came after Jacob Arminius, did end up being validly a cause for concern for several of these. If you ever have time to look into the pamphlet wars of the Remonstrants and the Reformed tradition, there's very interesting there. One of the big reasons, and this is one of the few times where the political motivations behind the Synod of Dort did have some justification to them. There was a threat of civil war amidst the Netherlands. They were a very recently freed and independent state, separated from a state that was under the Catholic Church, the Roman Catholic Church. And there were those in the Arminian party who, for whatever reason, were siding with those more sympathetic to the Roman Catholic Church and states. And those in the Remonstrants were more with the Netherlands and the Reformed tradition and were not going to risk a civil war. Just a quick note there. And just to get through a little bit of his notes here, let me make sure I'm in the right spot is here as well. As you can see, it's not going to quite line up with that here. This conference before the Supreme Court of the States of Holland took place on May 30th, 1607, is when this happened. And that matters because that means this is one of Jacob Arminius' most mature formulations of his theology around the subject of predestination, which is what this particular declaration is about. He died in 1609, 1610, right around there. So this was shortly before his death, and he did not write much more on this. He didn't study much more on this. By this point, he'd been talking about it for several years. So if you want to know some of the most mature formulations of Arminian theology, specifically around predestination, because that's what Arminian theology is, this is the book to read. And the ministers in attendance, and of course everything matters for historical context here, is Johannes Bicus from Dordrecht, Wernius Heimleckis from Amsterdam, I'm not going to get these names right, Johannes Utenbogart from The Hague, and Hermanus Gerardi from Enkhuizen. I am not native to this. And of course, just an important note, in the original English translation, the words attributed to Gomorrus are in the quotation marks. However, the indication of a direct quote does not appear in either the Dutch manuscript or the 1610 edition. That's important, where he notes that here. Subsequently, Franciscus Gomorius declared the theological differences between us were of such import that he would not dare to appear before God holding such opinions. That's just an important note there for understanding that quote. This should not be taken to mean that Gomorius did not utter these words, as he is cited as offering this opinion on multiple occasions, including in the minutes of the Synod of Dort a decade later. Throughout the previous English translation from the Latin manuscript, quotation marks are imported. The quotation marks are not in the original manuscript, and they do not appear in this translation unless there is a direct citation noted. So if you get Gunter's translation, he's only putting quotation marks where Arminius put the quotation marks. My apologies. And he notes here, when Jacob Arminius says, I was prepared to make a full and open statement of all my theological opinions, not leaving until it was fully done. Look up the Utenbogart, that's the historian, Historiae 16 through 17, provide some more textual evidence for that. If you're like me, you don't mind reading through these text notes. And when we get to chapters 3 and 4, remember this, in order that I might fulfill that pledge. Chapters 3 and 4 are kind of where we're going to see that reference to the text of this invitation. Back to it. 1. An account of a conference proposed to me, but which I refused. On the 30th of June, in the year 1605, 3 deputies of the Synod of South Holland came to meet me at Leyden. They were Francis Landsbergis, Libertus Fraxinius, and Daniel Dolagius of pious memory, each of them the minister of their respective churches at Rotterdam, The Hague, and Delft. The 2 members of the Synod of North Holland accompanied them, John Bogardus, minister of the church at Haarlem, and James Rolandus of the church of Amsterdam. They told me they had heard that the regular meetings of certain of their classes, and the examination to which candidates for holy orders must submit prior to their admission into the Christian ministry, some of the students of the University of Leyden had returned such answers to the questions propounded to them as were of a novel description and contrary to the common and received doctrine of the churches. These novelties, it was said, the young men affirmed to have been instilled into them while under my tuition. In such a situation of affairs, they desired me to engage in a friendly conference with them, by which they might have it in their power to perceive if there were any truth in this charge, they might afterwards be the better qualified to consult the interest of the church. To these suggestions I replied that I could by no means approve of the mode of proceeding which they recommended, for such a course would inevitably subject me to frequent and almost incessant applications for a friendly interview and conversation. If anyone thought it needful to pester me in that manner, whenever a student made use of a new or uncommon answer, and an excuse to pretended to have learned it from me. The following, therefore, appeared to me a plan of greater wisdom and prudence. As often as a student during his examination returned any answer which, according to his affirmation, had been derived from my instructions, provided the brethren considered such answer to stand in opposition to the confession and catechism of the Belgic churches, they should immediately confront that student with me, and, for the sake of the investigation of such affair, I was ready to proceed at my own expense to any town, however distant, which it might please the brethren to appoint for that purpose. The obvious consequence of this method would be that, after it had been resorted to a few times, it would cause it clearly and evidently to appear whether the student's assertions were the truth or only a calumny. That is a falsehood of some kind. But when Francis Landsbergis, in the name of the rest of his brethren, continued to urge and solicit a conference, I gave it as a further reason why I could not see the propriety of entering into a conference with them, that they appeared before me in the character of deputies, who had afterwards to render to the synod an account of all their proceedings, and I was not therefore at liberty to accede to their wishes, unless, not only with the knowledge and consent, but the express command of others who were my superiors, and whom I was equally with them bound to obey. Besides, it would be connected with no small risk and danger to me if, in the relation of the event of our conference, which they might hereafter give to the synod, I should leave that relation entirely to their faithfulness and discretion. They had likewise no cause for demanding anything of this kind from me, who was quite unconscious of having propounded a single doctrine, either at Leyden or Amsterdam, that was contrary to the word of God or to the confession and catechism of the churches in the Low Countries. For no such accusation had ever yet been brought against me by any person, and I was confident no attempt would be made to substantiate against me a charge of this description, if he who preferred such a charge were bound at the same time either to establish it by proofs, or, in failure of his proofs, to confess his uncharitable offense. And a lot of this stems back to Jacob Arminius' constant claims, and his correct and accurate claims, that he was in line with the Dutch Confession and the Heidelberg Catechism, and which he was. So anyone who was trying to accuse him of false teachings, which happened a lot, would have to compare with those two things. And as we talked about in our important introductory episode on this, when a student, one of the first students, and when he became the rector at Leyden, one of the accusations that suddenly appeared was his teachings would start corrupting the students. And now we see a similar accusation now appearing again. So Arminius is very astute. This is part of his very, very good political adeptness, which matters a lot because he is constantly being accused of false accusations and needs to know how to handle and maneuver through these things. That he's aware, and he even says as much himself, he doesn't want to give a report to these people and leave it into their hands. As he said, I should leave that relation entirely to their faithfulness and discretion because he doesn't trust them. That would be my assumption here, and I think that would be a pretty safe assumption on Arminius' side if he is making that assumption, is that he can't just trust the people that he's talking to. He knows who he can trust, and there is plenty of people he can't trust because there are plenty of people who have not only twisted his words that he has said, but just straight up accused him of things he never did say, and they have no proof for. So he's not just going to start working with these people he knows are not on his side. And it's important to note here, you'll see a lot of headings in this document, right? On the one I'm reading, it says account of a conference proposed to me, but which I refused. And it's basically the same thing here. The account of a conference proposed to me. Those are added in after the fact, sort of like you would have a chapter and verse breakups throughout a section of a text. And I don't have the book on me right now, but he notes here some of this information that pops up in Carl Bang's biography of Jacob Arminius. I actually have it sitting on my bookshelf behind me. I would recommend, if you want to learn more about Jacob Arminius and some of the historical context behind this that I don't bring up myself, get that. That is like the go-to biography here. But Bangs does note that the ministers here were likely acting on their own, for no mandate for their visit is indicated in the minutes of the preceding sessions of the synods. Arminius refers to them as taunten, deputies of or chosen representatives. We do not know if they led Arminius to believe that they were deputized, or whether he simply assumed this was to be the case. This is also comes from one of those things. Things just kind of get lost in history, especially if no one thinks to write them down. And then here's an important note here. This is on the line. Based on this, they requested that I enter into a friendly conversation with them to determine whether there be any truth to these allegations in order to remedy the situation, the very thing Arminius rejected. It seems that when the students of Arminius appeared before the class of Amsterdam, they were questioned sharply and expected to give answers that were formulaic in nature, as happened in our last episode. We cover it. He covers such an episode in this. There's a very important reason Jacob Arminius students are being questioned. It's because of this accusation against him. People are looking for any and all evidence they can against him. An example of this may be found in Utenbogart Historiae, page 327. The classis minutes indicate that a candidate named Narcissus was admitted in 1604, that's the figure we read about last time, but then required to undergo a second examination in writing in 1605. That was the same, that's part of the same thing we reread last time. Pages 72 through 74 of this. I don't believe I quoted that last time. And then the next note he has here. My superiors, whom I and they were equally bound to obey. Arminius is pointing out to them, the Hague, what they actually knew. Theirs was an Erastian society. His appointment as a Leyden professor came first and foremost under the purview of the university curators and the government in the Hague. Even matters of doctrine were not to be handled without the express knowledge and permission of these superiors. So that matters a lot. That's part of why he's in front of the Hague, is because, as I said at the start of this, religion and government are tied explicitly together. And that matters a lot for when accusations and such are being thrown out. Whenever anyone is being brought to a formal charge or actually having something pressed against them, it can't just be the university doing it. There has to be some kind of government involvement here. And we're going to go ahead and get into the next section here. This is going to be 2, an offer on my part of a conference with these deputies, which they refused. I then told these 5 gentlemen that, notwithstanding all of this, if they would consent to relinquish the title deputies, and would each in his own private capacity enter into a conference with me, I was ready at that very moment to engage in it. The conditions which I proposed to be mutually observed by us were these. 1, that they should explain their opinions on every single article, and then I would explain mine. 2, they should adduce their proofs, and I would adduce mine. Produce. 3, that they should at last attempt a refutation of my sentiments and reasons, and I would in return try to refute theirs. Funnily, that's exactly what this document is. 4, if in this manner either party could afford complete satisfaction to the other, the result would be agreeable. But if neither party could satisfy the other, then no mention of the subjects discussed in our private conference, or, if its unfavorable termination, should be made in any place or company whatever, until the whole affair should be referred to a national synod. But when to this proposition they had given a direct refusal, we should have separated from each other without further discourse, had I not requested that they would offer a conference in the same manner to Gomorius, as well as to Trocatius of pious memory, because it did not appear to me that I had given them any cause for making such a demand upon me, rather than upon either of my 2 colleagues. At the same time, I enforced my concluding expressions with several arguments, which would be too tedious now to repeat in the presence of your mightiness. When I had finished, the deputies replied that they would comply with my request, and would wait for the other 2 professors of divinity, and make them a similar offer. And prior to their departure from Leyden, they called and assured me that they had in this particular fulfilled their promise. This then is the first of the many requests that have been preferred to me. It was the cause of much conversation at the time when it occurred, for many persons spoke about it. Some of them related it imperfectly, and in a manner very different from what were the real circumstances of the whole transaction, while others suppressed many essential particulars, and studiously concealed their counter-proposal, which I had tendered to their deputies, and the strong reasons which I produced in its support. Again, Jacob Arminius being very justified in his suspicions, or at least what I presume to be his suspicions of not good intentions and good faith on everyone he's interacting with, being immediately proven true. It's also worth noting here, part of the reason Jacob Arminius was always sort of cleared of any charges is because no one could beat him in a debate. Now, of course, people didn't always agree with him. That's fine. That it can be the same way in our modern day. Debates don't always have to be about winning or convincing the other person that you're talking to change their mind, as much as some people might think they should be. But part of Jacob Arminius's exemplary strength in a lot of his dialogues was his biblical foundation and his knowledge of the Bible. It put him far and above so many of his interlocutors. And there were a fair amount of them. Now, of course, right, when you get to figures like Galatians and others, they are very knowledgeable in the Bible and the Scriptures, but a fair amount of those who were simply accusing him of things were not as knowledgeable in the Bible. They were more knowledgeable on the confessions. And we sort of see that same trend still in today. Yes, in the Reformed tradition, but other traditions as well. But particularly in the Reformed tradition, I know of a Reformed professor who, an Arminian student, went through the school, and he was one of the only Arminians in the Reformed school, and the teacher basically had him as an assistant, and when he was gone one day, he had the Arminian student actually teach a class, and part of that challenge was to the other students to argue with him from the Bible alone, because he knew that student knew more of the Bible than anyone else, and he used that student to force his Reformed college students to actually look into and study the Scriptures more than they were studying the confessions. I think it's just a funny story. Of course, for every one of those, you'll have different stories. I'm not going to get into that today. Where was I on these footnotes? 16. We are skipping over several of these. Lucas Trelcatius passed away on September 12th, 1607. The manuscript reads, Pie Memore. Trelcatius was appointed Professor Extraordinarius only 3 days after Arminius' appointment to his professorship at Leyden, if I'm correct. Perhaps a move by the university curators to balance the theological tendencies in the faculty. Trelcatius was known to hold the supralapsarian view. The reason that matters so much is because that is the view Jacob Arminius was most harsh on. Of the two views, supralapsarian and infralapsarian, he was more harsh on supralapsarian. If I'm getting this backwards, we'll find out later in this series. And that is going to be the last note. I think we'll get through this next section, and then we're going to end it there. This is a very short section. Number 3 is another application is made to me. A few days afterwards, that is on the 28th of July in the same year, 1605, a request of a similar character was likewise presented to me in the name of the Presbytery of the Church of Leyden. But on this condition, that if I approved it, other persons whom such a request equally concerned should also be summoned before the same ecclesiastical tribunal. But if this offer did not receive my approbation, nothing further should be attempted. But when I had intimated that I did not clearly perceive how this request could possibly obtain approval from me, and when I had subjoined my reasons, which were of the same description as those which I had employed on the preceding occasion, my answer was perfectly satisfactory to Bronchovius the burgomaster of Leyden, think of that like a mayor, and Morella of pious memory, both of whom had come in the name of that church in which they were the elders, and they determined to abandon all ulterior proceedings in that business. And Gunther doesn't have any notes on that particular little section as far as I can tell. But I do. If you see of pious memory, if you haven't picked that up yet, that is a reference to someone who has passed in sort of an honorable way. And I think that's really important in understanding Jacob Arminius' mindset, though he has a lot of very harsh critiques of some of the Reformed theology of his contemporaries, specifically on matters of predestination where the disagreements are. He still clearly recognizes them as brothers and sisters in the body of Christ. Brothers, for the most part in their case. I think all the people that he was directly interacting with were all men. And he clearly still held them in high esteem, despite, in some cases, what it was that some figures were doing. I'm willing to bet he had a higher view of some of these other figures than, say, someone like Gomorius and others who were so obstinate in their opposition to him, or those who were making false claims. But he was still doing his best, and this is what we should be doing. This is a very good example to follow of when someone is doing us wrong, especially a brother or sister in the body of Christ. We are called to react very differently than how we might be so inclined to do on our own, to lash out, to make the same kind of accusations, and do the same things. Galatians 5:22 through 26 is something I try to keep in mind a lot. I'll actually grab a different Bible than that one with all those bookmarks to try and flip through that really quick. But and this is very much to Jacob Arminius' credit, in the face of constant opposition and those who were doing him wrong. And part of this was absolutely, if he does something, he's going to have a lot more consequences than others because of how much opposition there is to him. But that can't take away that temptation to strike back in the same way, to say the same things about them. And what does Jacob Arminius do? He refutes them. He doesn't go around slandering them like he is being slandered constantly. He doesn't sin in return to the sin against him. And that's something I think a lot of us, and I am no exception to this, I struggle with this just as much as the next person. But this is one of the reasons I look up to Jacob Arminius so much. 22 through 26, here we go. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such things there is no law. Now those who belong to Christ Jesus crucified the flesh with its passions and its desires. If we live by the Spirit, let's follow the Spirit as well. Let's not become boastful, challenging one another, envying one another. And I think Jacob Arminius is a very good example of that. You don't have to agree with his theology to sort of recognize this as a very historical sort of piece of information there. He literally went through years of people slandering him, of constant opposition to pretty much anything he tried to do just because of his own theological positions. And, right, Gregorius is one of the loudest and most notable figures. He's also a very important figure in the Reformed tradition, and he was not quiet. At least, unlike others, he was open and he was public and he was clear about where his stance was. He wasn't, as far as I'm aware, going behind Arminius' back and accusing him of false things. Whether or not his accusations that he were making were true is a different story. But he was public with them. He wasn't being a voice behind a closed door. Now, you can make speculations on what Gregorius did in other areas relating to Jacob Arminius. That's a discussion for a different time. But we should have that same, at least, respect for each other, as John Wesley would say, even if we cannot be in union, can we at least love each other, right? When you love your brother or sister, even when you have a strong disagreement, you're going to act differently than you would in other circumstances. But I'm going to stop myself before I keep rambling on for too long. This video is already at 32 minutes, so I know that's going to be quite long. That's how our Monday videos work. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this. This will be one of our longer read-throughs just because I'm going to be going through commentary as we're going through it. But I promise it's worth it. Feel free to read through the declaration on your own. As I said, there's going to be a link to it in the description. And for each of these videos, I am just going to link to the beginning of the Declaration of Sentiments. I'm not going to put a link to where we are picking up in each one. That way, someone comes along down the line, they can kind of go to the start of it and catch up. With that, you guys go in peace. Have a wonderful day. God bless.